common challenge for photographers using wide-angle lenses is creating depth in their images. The shots may seem flat and dull if they do not have a distinct point of interest and a clear visual path that draws the viewer's eye into the scene. Depth in an image is an illusion, and to make your two-dimensional images look convincing and realistic, you need to create a perception of depth using appropriate techniques. One of the most effective techniques for adding visual depth to your photograph is to incorporate a compelling foreground element. So in this video, what I'm going to do is guide you through the process I adopted to compose these shots, analyzing some common mistakes people make when using a wide-angle lens. Hi everyone, what's going on? Welcome to my channel. I'm Andrea Livieri and I use my over 10 years of experience as a professional travel and landscape photographer to teach people photography through workshops and online courses, helping them unleash their uniqueness and create the photos that best represent their vision. Alright, the wide-angle lens is something that many of you may have used before, or you might be new to it, and it's exciting to see the world from such a unique perspective and to take in this grand view. This is a broad topic, of course, however, to enhance your compositions and create compelling images, it's essential to keep a few basic guidelines in mind. Today I want to focus specifically on one crucial aspect, so let's dive in and see how to optimize foreground framing to improve depth and create strong relationship between the foreground and background. Before going into this discussion composition-wise, everyone has their own preferences when it comes to what looks good in a photo. What I'm going to share are some ideas that have helped me, but they are not strict rules. They are just things you might find useful to think about when you are taking your own photos. Okay, let's start by analyzing the scene. Here I was in the Italian Dolomites in Trecime Natural Park with my workshop group, studying the scene and getting prepared for the sunset. From that position you have a ton of options. You can focus on the three famous peaks, you can frame the entire big panorama of the valley or capture the beautiful Monte Paterno, you name it. Here are a couple of simple snapshots of the area pointing towards the south. The sun would have set right about here, but as you can see, there were quite thick low clouds to the west, making it unlikely to have some dynamic direct light on the Trecime. However, if we look at this other image on the Monte Paterno, the light was pretty good, so we decided to change the plan and focus our attention on Monte Paterno. Now, at this point, we need to find a nice foreground that invites the viewer into the scene. So, with the camera handheld, I started to explore the area, trying to frame some rocks that could work as leading lines. Great, so let's start with the first example of compositional failure. This brings us to a common mistake I see quite often, and that's having a too busy foreground. So I began exploring the area, snapping some handheld shots to figure out a nice spot to place the tripod. There is a lot going on in this lower half of the frame, and even though we can identify some leading lines pointing towards the mountain, the foreground is very chaotic. Additionally, the light doesn't cooperate very well. The transition between the close foreground and the background is not organic. The light is very harsh. The subject is much darker than the foreground, which is right the opposite of what I wanted. So I don't think this framing is the best option for this type of scene. As you can see, I decided to use a vertical orientation. This choice usually depends on what you want to keep in and out of the frame, and also on emphasizing the nature of the subject you want to photograph. A pro tip, I always highly recommend experimenting with both orientation when you are in the field. There is usually no right or wrong answer. It really depends on the subject and the feeling you choose to convey. Lines, shape and form all change their appearance when the camera is turned from a horizontal position to a vertical position. Now, let's move to another composition and see the progression of me studying the scene. Here I try to include different elements as a foreground, but again, it doesn't work. The tree competes too much with the peak in the background, grabbing almost all the attention and creating a sort of blind spot in the image. What we want is to keep the viewer's eye moving and interested, right? So you have to make sure every part of your image is clear and easy to see. So no obstacles, no distractions, just a smooth and engaging visual journey. Then the overall arrangement of the elements is very unbalanced. The close foreground is quite messy with these scattered rocks, badly arranged that don't really help in creating a proper visual entry point that draws the viewer eye into the scene. Another significant problem here, that's another mistake I see very often, is the lack of a clear midground. That's most of the time correlated with the camera's height, and here is emphasized even more because of the tree that obstruct this part of the scene. When you want to include an interesting foreground, it's crucial to be mindful of the middle distance and the camera's height. Shooting from a lower viewpoint is usually very helpful to compress the middle distance, but if you stay too low, that may lead to insufficient separation between objects in the middle distance or between the middle distance and the background. On the other hand, if you shoot from too high, meaning that you are opening up the planes in the middle distance, it can result in an excessive empty space, and you will also lose the effectiveness of the close objects in the foreground. So be mindful and take your time to discover and experiment with the foreground elements that complements the background and establish a connection between the foreground, the middle distance, and background to create a cohesive composition and a nice flow of elements with the photo. Great, let's move on to the third variant. Here I decided to ditch the idea of including the tree and return to my initial concept of working with rocks and leading lines. I was drawn to this section specifically in the midground that echoed the shape of the peak. However, once again, I wasn't very happy with the foreground. While there were leading lines on both sides pointing in the right direction, the replacement wasn't very functional or well balanced. The big center section didn't convince me at all. It carried too much visual weight, drawing all the attention. Here is another example from the same spot, but as you can see, it doesn't work. It's too confusing and lack visual harmony. So to emphasize the peak, I needed to simplify the scene as much as possible. So after spending a few minutes walking around, I found this beautiful arrangement of rocks, and it just clicked. I immediately recognized that it was exactly what I was searching for. So I finalized the camera position by lowering the shooting point a bit to compress the middle ground a little more. Then I slightly adjusted the framing to reposition these sorts of scars. And you will see in a moment why I call them this way, avoiding having this crack fall right on the angle. This foreground immediately caught my attention for several reasons. Firstly, the close foreground seamlessly blends into the overall scene. I'm particularly drawn to the strong central leading line formed by this beautiful layer of rocks. The sidelight plays a crucial role, adding depth, a lovely 3D effect, and making it an effective guide towards the mountain. For example, here is a very similar framing of the scene after sunset before heading back to the van, but as you can see, it lacks the same visual impact. Secondly, I waited until this cloud moved just to the left of the peak, creating a continuation of this S shape. And it also balanced pretty nicely the visual weight on the opposite side of the frame. There is a harmonious balance and connection in the middle ground and a seamless transition between shadows and lights from front to back. The beautiful color contrast, almost like a dual-tone color palette, enhances the simplicity and I would say the elegance of the composition. And lastly, what truly guided my choice of this foreground wasn't strictly related to photography or any other photos I've seen on the web of this area. The spark of inspiration comes from the movie character Azog, the pale orc from the movie The Hobbit. The mountain's shape reminiscent of Mount Gundabad. I know, it might seem weird, but that's how my brain works, and it's fun. If you're interested in reading more about my approach to photography and haven't subscribed to my newsletter, I send out weekly emails with useful tips, practical insights, blog articles, and inspiration. So check out my website, I'll leave the link in the video description. Now, I want to give you a plan of action. These are the main 3 takeaways that you can immediately implement to improve your composition with a wide-angle lens. Number 1, try to simplify the foreground by eliminating any distracting elements. Try to keep only what adds to the overall mood and message of your shots. Number 2, arrange the elements in the foreground in a way you can get a nice balance in visual weight and flow. Each component should work together seamlessly, creating a cohesive visual experience and utilizing leading lines effectively. And number 3, be intentional in positioning your camera. Give your midground some breathing room by maintaining proper object separation and avoid positioning the camera too high, as this can compromise both composition and the overall sense of depth. I hope the concepts we have talked about in this video will give you a few things to think about next time you are out in the field. If you enjoyed this video and if you'd like to see more of this, please let me know in the comments below. Remember to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. And as always, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Ciao!